Hey Artnerds! So today we're going to do a demonstration that relies heavily on water-based watercolor markers, specifically dye-based watercolor markers, and a simple spray bottle of water. Curious to see what I'm going to do? You're just going to have to keep watching. So for this tutorial, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to select some of our base colors. Now, I already have an illustration prepared. This was sketched with pink Color Eno lead on a Blick watercolor sketchbook. So this is cellulose-based paper. Just going to put that aside for a moment. Next, we're going to focus on picking out some of the colors we're going to want to begin with. And what we're doing is we're going to apply a little bit of color and then we're going to spritz it with water. We're going to let that kind of bleed. So I've picked out a skin tone and some pinks. I'm going to grab some greens and maybe a really light blue for her dress. And then we're going to want something kind of like a yellow ochre. And I apologize, I seem to be all off camera. Sorry about that. So something that will work as a yellow ochre or straw color. And I'm going to want maybe a few sort of darker colors for the flowers. Now, of course, we're going to swatch all this before we commit to applying ink to paper. So I have a scratch piece of cellulose paper here. And I'm just going to start swatching through my colors. And I'm going to kind of X out the ones I just absolutely won't use. And I'm kind of organizing the ones I do plan on using. And some of them will work as shading colors for what I want to do later, but I'm going to kind of hold them back for later and not apply them right away. So over here we have our floral colors. I'm going to X out the ones that I swatched but opted not to include. So we have a very bright purple, an orange, a yellow, a blue, and a bluer red. We've got over here our skin tones. We have kind of a bonus pink. We have over here the hat, the colors we might use on the hat. This is the color for the dress. And then we have our grass colors over here. And these are all just sort of base colors. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to do something for the sky. And I'm going to use the same color blue that we're later going to use for her dress. And I'm going to apply this to my non-porous craft sheet. You can apply it to a scrap piece of paper. And you're going to want to use water-based, dye-based watercolor markers. I'm using the Arctic set. You guys have seen me talk about this in a couple of other videos. You're also going to want to have a water brush with some water in it. I've also got a little cup of salt that I keep on my table side. And I'm going to sprinkle the salt into the dye/water solution. And that's going to give me kind of like a snowflake or a crinkled effect. And it's just a really easy, simple way to add some texture to whatever you're painting. You can also use a paper towel to pick up some of the color that you've put down. And I'm trying to keep my hand out of the water so I can apply it in some of these smaller areas. Now I'm not bringing the blue all the way down the page, but I am kind of using it here and there to create an outline on the character. And I'm also going to dab in some darker blue while this is still wet. And I'm going to do that just kind of here and there. And this is art that I created myself. It's a sketch I drew. But you can use a stamp or a digi-stamp, or, you know, if you're not necessarily that confident in sketching something, you can kind of use something that's already existing. Now, part of what I've done here, though, is I've sketched this in with the color, pink that I mentioned earlier. And as we paint, that's going to kind of start to melt into our watercolor. So that is part of the effect. So now that I've applied this, I'm just going to add a little bit of salt. You want to add it while the paper is still wet, but not soaking wet. You can also add it in the outline, and that'll kind of break up that outline so it doesn't seem so harsh. All right, now we're gonna let this dry completely. All right, so now that this has had a chance to dry, I'm going to use a drafting brush to remove the loose salt, and I'm going to use my fingernail to remove any that's more stubborn. And I will show you guys in a minute, but you can see a really soft, sort of almost snowflake-esque pattern in the background. And I just did that so that it doesn't come across as a lazy wash, when really that was my intention the whole time, was to do kind of a lazy wash. All right, so next we're going to color her skin. We're going to use 205 from the Arttex set, and that is a very light peach. And I am applying it directly to my craft mat, and I'm going to use my water brush with clean water. And if you encounter any salt, just kind of blow it away, brush it away as you go. It's not a big deal, but it's also not something we want to leave on the paper as we put subsequent layers on it. And I'm leaving kind of a strong highlight at the top, or at the bottom, sorry. Well, a strong highlight of white at the top and a strong mark of color at the bottom. And not all water brush sets, or not all watercolor marker sets include a water brush, but it's a really, really handy thing to have. You also want to have a paper towel handy, because sometimes they can get a little bit drippy. So I'd like to do some darker color on her legs. So I'm going to erase or wipe away the water, and that'll allow me to put a nice amount of the peach back down on my surface and just sort of work that in. All right, so our first layer of skin has dried. I want to darken a few areas, but this isn't my final pass. This is just sort of me laying down initial colors. So I add a little bit darker shadow here under the legs, and you may find that difficult to do if you're using a water brush, as they tend to get kind of leaky. All right, so I'll clean that area up, and while that dries, I'm going to grab one of the two browns I selected, re-swatch it just to make sure I've got my order right. And I'm going to start by applying some to my craft mat. So I'm trying to create these really light, sort of delicate colors. this water brush is particularly leaky, so I may end up switching it out for something a little less prone to dribbling. Okay, I'll give that a chance to dry too. So now that the hat has had a little bit of a chance to dry, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little bit more. And the reason I'm not applying it directly is that sometimes it just puts down too much color. And at this stage, I'm really trying to keep everything kind of light and kind of open. And after we do our spray technique, then I'll do something a little more direct. I do want this area though to have more color, so I'm going to try and brush some more in. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I find these water brushes to be a little bit frustrating and difficult to use, but they work so well for these sort of techniques that I just kind of overlook how much I have to struggle with to get them to do what I want them to do. I mean, often they'll put down too much water, and that can be kind of soaked up, or you can just allow it to dry. So while the hat dries, actually, I should do something about her basket. And for her basket, I actually want it to match her hat. So I'm going to apply more of 407 to my craft mat. And we talked about finding a better water brush, didn't we? There's one. Well, hopefully it's a little less leaky. And I'm going to add details later on, just trying to get kind of that initial watercolor sketch in. Now I should have done some blue on the inside of the basket. I would ask you guys to remind me, but I don't think I can hear you from here. Maybe if y'all yell really loud. Now, I love alcohol markers, but what I really like about watercolor markers, particularly these dye-based watercolor markers, is they're very easy to clean up and they're non-toxic. So you can have them in a house with pets, you can have them in a house with kids. And if you've got young children, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about them getting into it. All right, so I added some of this brown directly to the hat. I'm just going to use my water brush just to blend it out a little bit. Now, one of the reasons I'm not going directly in with any of my colors is often it's just too intense. Treating it more like watercolor than like markers allows me to kind of slowly build up the colors I want. So I've applied some really bright green, number 32. And I'm going to start doing the grass. Now my intention isn't to just fill in the grass like it's a solid shaped thing. My intention is to do these grass strokes. And I'm starting with the brightest color because even though it's gray and nasty and fall outside and rainy all week, I like to do springtime things. I like to do bright, sunny things. I create art in order to escape. And there's no better day to escape to than a nice spring day. At least when outside is 50 degrees and it's been raining all week and it feels like it's 27. So I'm using this really nice bright spring green to apply my first layer of grass. And I'm even crossing over into her dress. Now the next layer I'm going to have to do the dress so that way when I do the other greens, they don't get all muddy. And you can do some areas that are more intense and some areas that are more watery. Try to vary the height of your grass strokes so that it feels a little bit more like a lived-in environment, like an existing environment that's around her. Give us some atmospheric perspective here, y'all. You can go back into some of your lighter areas and add a little bit more saturated green. You can also go a little bit lower in your grass line here and there. It's going to help add some depth. And if you like, you can even go in with your brush marker here and there and add some strokes of grass. And I have them all kind of moving over to the right since our wind is coming from the left. So the next thing I want to do is I want to apply some color to her dress. And initially I wanted the dress to be this sort of Delft shade of blue or like a Danish shade of blue. So that's the color I kind of want to work up to. But I want to kind of pace myself. I want to have like room to get there. So I've applied some to the craft sheet. Now I'm going to apply it to her dress. And I'm doing the same thing where I'm trying to keep sort of the highest parts the lightest. So we want to leave that as a highlight. And it creates this really nice, light, sun-kissed sort of look. Kind of saturated this area here. That way I could do a little bit of softer, more subtle blending. And then here on the ruffle, I'm trying to leave it really light and sketchy. So I have some areas I'd like to darken a bit, but I'm going to do that after this has had a chance to dry. So our first layer on the dress has dried. I'm going to apply some more of the blue to my craft mat, and I'm going to use this down here where her dress ruffles a little bit, as well as just kind of loosely sketching a zigzag sort of pattern. And I want a darker blue, so I'm going to wipe that up because it's gotten kind of watered down. Right, so while that dries, I'm going to grab another green. This is kind of a yellow green. This is 130. Actually, I'm going to go with 128 first. Apply that to my craft sheet. And I'm not doing every blade with this green. I'm kind of keeping it lower. And it's okay to have your grass blades crisscross. That's what would happen in real life anyway. Next, I'm going to take my red and I'm going to use that on the bow of her hat, and watered down it makes a really light pink. but we're gonna work our way up to a full red. Use it on her hair tie and here on the sash of her dress. So far, everything we've done has been really light and delicate. All right, so for white girls, it's pretty unusual for me to paint blonde, so I think I will paint her as a blonde today. And I am starting with yellow number 6. This is one of the colors I'm going to use for the flowers. And right now, I'm just kind of keeping my details pretty loose. I'm just mostly trying to maintain this idea, this feeling of like really light and bright summery day. So one of the things about doing watercolor with dye-based watercolors is if an area is already pretty saturated with water, you're not going to be able to get it to take much color. You have to wait till it either evaporates or you have to lift it a little bit in order to add some color. All right, next I'm going to do a little bit of direct application with number 27. No, wait. I'm going to start with number 32. And that's just going to add a little more saturated color. I'm just using really light strokes. Then I'm going to use number 27. And what I'm going to do is I'm only going to use it to kind of work half the page so it gets lighter as we go. And then I'm just going to use a little bit of the darker green, mostly just under where she's standing. Now using that skin tone peachy color, I'm going to go ahead and render in her jawline and kind of trace around her ears and do a cast shadow where her arm overlaps her face. And using the brown we designated for her hat, I have an area here I missed, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that. And I'm still not really adding any details in yet. I'm kind of darkening some areas because I want there to be something for the water we're going to spray to interact with. And some of this I'm going to have to kind of redo and rework after we spray it because we'll kind of have lost some of that detail. That's why you don't want to work it too much right now because you're going to end up losing a lot of detail. Now, something we are going to go full color in though is with just kind of sketching in some flowers. And I'm starting with the same yellow we used on her hair. In fact, I'll add some of that up here. And these are just really sketchy flowers right now because when we spray this with water, it's really going to activate them and they're going to kind of go everywhere. And we want to vary the size of our flowers too. And that was 221. Now we're going to take an orange, number 5, and we're just doing really little flowers here and there and try to randomize it a bit. We're going to keep the little orange flowers kind of low to the ground. Maybe add a couple right up there, like they've been picked up by the wind. All right, now we have a blue. And even the way it is now, even without spraying it, we've got like this really pretty, lively, light sort of drawing. And you could leave it like this, but I really like spraying it to kind of randomize things, get the colors moving. And then we have the same red that we're going to use in her bow. And as I'm adding flowers to the grass, I'm also adding them to her basket to imply that she's been out flower picking. And you can keep your shapes really simple, or you can try to do more complicated shapes. Right now I'm kind of keeping it to like a flying saucer shape. All right, so I have here number 7 in pink. And I'll just do something more, a little different. If you're looking for inspiration, I highly recommend you just Google wildflowers. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Maybe I'll grab one more purple, a cooler purple, and we'll do just some like little violet shapes kind of down here. Could also do like lavender. You can add white later to look like daisies. Now I'm almost ready to spray. I'm going to grab some more red. I'm just kind of darkening this ribbon. I'm also going to grab at least one bulldog clip because this is inexpensive cellulose paper. It's already starting to kind of lift up at the side, so I'm going to want to clamp it down. So I only need to clamp one side. And you can get bulldog clips at office supply stores, at art supply stores. They're cheaper if you get them through the office supply section though. So that's where I recommend you look first. Okay, now you're going to need a spritzer of water, and you may opt to mask off some areas. I have another Artex tutorial where I demonstrate a very easy masking technique. You can use a little bit of masking tape. You can use some masking paper or tracing paper. We're going to start without the mask, and we're just going to lightly spritz it first on the lower half of the paper. You don't want to saturate this. You just want to get the colors kind of moving a little bit. And these are dye-based inks, so they're going to be very water reactive. That's why we picked them today. A little bit up here. If you pull the trigger slowly, you're going to get nice fat drops. If you pull it quickly, you're going to get a fine mist. You can even spray some up there where we sprinkled our salt initially. Now, if you're looking to do a little bit more randomization, you can pull out our old friend salt. This is kosher salt, so it's a little larger than table salt. It's going to have kind of a different effect. And I just love how just the sprinkling of water sort of loosens the effect up. I'll show you guys. So you see on her dress, we can see where the water has already activated the dye again. You can, if you want to, run a paper towel over it very gently if you want to lift some areas back up. But, you know, I'm actually pretty happy with it. I don't necessarily want to do that. You can also take a toothbrush dipped in water if you want to, like, do more sort of area-specific splatters, or you can dip a brush in water. I'll grab one for you guys and demonstrate that. but it's all really easy, and what I really like about it is it's very loose. Okay, so we've got a really cheap low Cornell brush here. Dip it in water, and then you can even kind of flick water by running your fingers across like that. So that's a very, very easy technique that allows you to get a specific area. And as the water dries, you're really going to notice just how much it moves. So I'm going to step away and allow this to have a nice opportunity to dry. So looking at this, I wish I'd brought more of the light green over and into her dress. I think that would have been really nice, and over her leg as well. So I'm going to attempt to do that. That might mess things up a little bit. Actually, you know what might be easier? I just do it directly. All right, so we were adding just a little bit more grass kind of crossing over her leg, so it actually looks like she's standing in it. I'm trying to avoid puddles of water, and I'm trying to avoid grains of salt. But I think we were successful. I still have standing water on the page, so I actually kind of want to spritz the sky a little bit more. That's just going to help break it up a little bit. And I'm kind of dribbling big loose drops as well. I also want to kind of break up her hat a little bit, but I don't want to do it with the spritzer. I'm going to do it with that brush technique I showed you guys. And then I'm going to try and step away, because that's the thing I really struggle with, is overworking things, especially at a stage where that's just not good for the piece. Now, I really love how this looks down here, where the water splatters, actually you guys can't see that, let me move it up, where the water splatters have broken up the grass edge. So, and that's another thing about dye-based watercolor, is you can allow things to dry, reassess it, and then come back. So even if you have wet on the paper, you can let that dry and then respritz it and it'll reactivate. So that's something that definitely takes some time to learn how to work around, but once you do, you can really learn how to use those effects. Kind of want to break up this area here. It seems to have puddled a lot, so I'm just going to kind of dab up some of the excess. Okay, for real this time though, I'm going to let it dry. All right, my friends, this has had a chance to dry. I'm going to zoom in so you can see our splatter effect detail. So on the flowers, I'd actually like to get more splatter going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of lightly mask her off just with a piece of tracing paper. Now, you don't want to saturate this. This is not going to prevent it from getting from the water seeping under. It's just sort of to protect against the initial spray. And I'm going to hold it far back because I want light randomized spray. Okay, we'll see how that looks once it's had a chance to dry. All right, guys, so this is dry. I'm going to go ahead and use my drafting brush and remove the salt. Any that remains on the paper, I'm going to scrape away with my nail. And it's really important that we remove the salt before we do any further painting. Okay, so using the spray has really loosened things up. It's made it a little bit more lively, a little bit more atmospheric. You can leave it as it is if you like it like this, but we're gonna take this further and we're gonna add some more detail. We're gonna tighten it up a little bit more. Okay, so at this stage, I'm going to grab the peach we used for her hand, or for her skin, and I wanna do a little bit darker on her skin, and then I want to actually add tighter details. And what's fun about these kind of watercolor markers is they have a brush tip, so you can actually do some kind of inking with them. You can tighten up your details with them. All right, so I'm adding another layer of color, but I am still leaving that top edge lighter. That way we get some nice lighting. And that's a really easy way to do kind of light, delicate shading. And this particularly works well if you have a limited number of colors that you're working with, just kind of keeping things simple. And for long-term viewers of my channel, y'all know that's something I've struggled with for a long time. It's something I have to practice. So don't feel bad if it doesn't come easily or naturally to you. Some of us just take a little bit longer to learn. And we all pick different skills up at different speeds. So even if you're not necessarily as good at art or artistic things as you'd like to be, I'm sure you're good at something that I'm terrible at. There's so many things that I'm terrible at. I'm sure there's something that you are better than I am at. And when it comes to art, I'm still kind of a novice in many ways myself. So this is something we can spend all of our lives learning and improving and growing. So just remind yourself that it's not a race and that you're doing it because it brings you pleasure. And that'll take some of that pressure off. All right, so we're gonna let the skin tone dry. I'm gonna go into the hat and add some direct color. And my goal is not to obliterate all the nice spray texture we were able to achieve. In fact, I'm gonna reintroduce that. Let's try. Yes, awesome. Okay, so you can get a splatter technique using a water brush as well. Haha, portable splatter. And if the lines you're making start becoming kind of static, if it starts kind of killing the livelihood of the piece, adding some splatter is a great way to kind of reintroduce some liveliness to your piece. Lightly blend that out, lightly blend that out in some areas just to kind of soften that edge. Same with that. I actually really like how instead of red, the red is pink when we watered it down. And it's a really nice, rich pink. So I don't necessarily want to lose that color by overworking it or overcoloring it. So right now I'm going into her hair. Trying to remember to keep that edge closer to the sun, lighter. Now sometimes we lose that a little bit because of the splatter, and that's okay. We're not trying to perfect this. I'm just tightening it up a little bit, inking it a little bit, adding a defined edge towards the bottom. Now I would like to darken her hair just a little bit. So I have here a darker yellow. I'm going to swatch it. All right, looks good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this to my impermeable craft mat. I'm going to pick it up with my original yellow, and that's going to give us kind of a blended color. And I'm going to use that in areas where we want a little bit of darker color. Clean it up. That way we have that space for other things. So it looks like the hat has had a chance to dry. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better. And then I'm just gonna add a little hash mark pattern to imply a weave on this hat, like it's a woven straw hat. And I'm gonna flick that with just a little bit of water as well, because it's a little tighter than I want, keeping this really loose. And I'm keeping the straw texture mostly to the shadows, so we're adding a little bit of detail and we're adding some color into the shadow, so it becomes less apparent as we reach the highlight. So I'm going to use that water brush. Not quite getting me the splatter I want, so I need a little extra water in there. Hopefully that'll loosen it up a little bit for us. We're going to go back into our skin tone. And I'm just going to delineate her ear a little bit better. Cast the shadow from her arm onto her face. Now we're going to grab the same brown we used on the hat. And I didn't really break up the texture on the hat as much as I wanted, so I'm going to apply some of the brown to my craft mat. Just kind of blend that out a little bit. We'll see how that looks once it's dried. And we're going to apply some more brown onto the craft sheet so we can get into this basket here. That's going to need a little bit of time to dry. Going back into her skin, I'm going to tighten up the shadow on her leg. So what this all really comes down to is playing with tightly rendered things or more rendered things and loosely rendered things. But in the end, we're trying not to overwork this too much. We want it to be loose and playful. So originally on her dress, I kind of wanted to try doing a checkerboard pattern. I think that might end up being a little bit much, but I'm torn because I do think the dress would benefit from some pattern to kind of differentiate it from the sky. So, you know what? There's only really one way to find out, and that is to be brave and to take a chance. So for the checkerboard pattern for the dress, we want to follow the contour of the dress. That means thinking about the shapes underneath the dress and how they influence the fabric. So I'm using kind of a loose double line here to imply just one line. And a loose double line going the other way to imply the cross. And I didn't really wait long enough because we don't get like a nice crisp defined square. But that's okay. I'll sketch in her arm underneath the fabric there. And if you start noticing things getting too tight and losing some of the liveliness of the initial painting, you can always flick some water on it to help loosen things up. So now we're working on the large part of the dress. So I'm going to pick an area in the middle, sketch my first, and see, I kind of messed up. I should have done it more scooped down. But that's okay. We notice things so that the next time we don't have to make the same mistake. And what's important is we've kind of captured the ruffles, the folds in the dress. Now we need to do I'm going to cheat and add just a little bit of blue there, since you would see that. I guess whoever cut the fabric on her dress cut it kind of poorly. And since the dress is kind of cinched at her waist, we want these to sort of radiate out. And I see here I have a drop of water that I didn't plan on, so I'm going to clean that up just so that my arm isn't dragging through it as I work. All right, that actually looks very pretty. So, of course, I'm going to mess it up just a little bit. I'm just going to add some splatter to just kind of loosen that up a little bit so it doesn't look like it was added like at the last minute. You don't have to use a water brush for this technique. You can use just a brush dipped in water. The water brush is just really handy because I can squeeze more water into the tip as I need it. Right, so we just want a little bit of water to kind of break up that pattern, loosen it up a little bit. Now I'm going to draw the ruffle on her dress, as well as delineate it a little bit where it meets the sky. A little bit here in the grass as well. But we're going to do a more broken line in the grass, so it looks like it's a little bit more in the distance, or like the grass is kind of overlapping. Also, going to darken the folds in the dress, as well as where they meet the bow on her dress. And we're going to use the red again, just to kind of tighten up some details. It's looking really good. All right, so we got this basket over here. And I'm doing this sort of sinuous-esque like pattern for the braided rim, and then more of the same up here on the handle, and then I'm going to do kind of a crosshatch woven pattern. So I want to kind of break up that woven pattern just a little bit. So I'm going to use my water brush, which seems to have some green in it, just to kind of soften it here and there. All right, so while that dries, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the grass, and I just really want to be really delicate with it. So I'm only going to use a couple colors. I'm going to use 27 and I'm going to use 29. And the intention isn't to completely redraw the grass or to cover up the splatters. We like the splatters. It's just to tighten it up and, you know, add some green back to some of the splatters that really lost some of that green. Or add some green to some of the areas that cross over the dress. And in nature, of course, not all of the stems for all of the plants would be the same color green. There are lots of different greens in nature, from yellow greens to blue greens, but kind of keeping it simple. Kind of goes with our light and airy imagery here. And then we're going to add a little more of the darker green, 29. So remember, it's all kind of a juxtaposition between tight and controlled and very loose and gestural. If anything starts to get too tight, we can always spray it or flick a little water onto it. Now I'm going to switch over to 126, which is the green we'd initially used, as our darker shade of green to add a little detail. And I'm just going to use that kind of lightly over here. And finally, we're going to go way back to number 32, which is our lightest, yellowest green. So now, all we really have left are the flowers. I'm going to grab a piece of tracing paper just to kind of protect the flowers I've done from my hand and from smearing. And I'm just going to kind of draw in some petal shapes here and there. That's why I was not really concerned about it the first time, because I knew a lot of that was going to get kind of lost. And I mean, they're really, really simple. If they start getting too tight, I'm going to flick some water on them. We're not going for tight today. Also not going to render them all the same amount. Kind of like the little orange ones being a little lost. I'm going to add some of the violets back in. And pink mostly stayed intact, almost to the point where I kind of want to go back in and mess some of them up a little bit. Mess this up. And some of the basket up a little bit. You can also, if you like, draw some more flowers or even just some bits of green over here. Have some more flowers in the wind. And then spritz it just a little bit so it'll move. Oof, that's too much spritzing, but we're going to leave it. We're going to leave it and we're going to let it dry. And then we're going to take a look at this piece and decide what to do next. All right, guys, so at this stage, we have a couple of decisions we are going to need to make. One, are we going to want to ink this? Are we going to add any darker outlines? Or are we going to leave it as is? Two, do we want to add any white? Now, for today's tutorial, I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I happen to really like this product, and you may have seen it in other videos. But you can also use white gel pens. You can use white gouache. If you don't have any of those, you can also use things like whiteout. So it doesn't have to be this specific white. This is just the one I happen to like. And looking at this, there's not too many areas where I really need to go back in. So what I really did is I just kind of dipped it around in my Bleed Proof White. Pick some up on my brush pen. If you wish, you can use a separate brush for this. And I'm just using this to kind of add back in highlights that maybe got kind of lost. I'm also going to use it to, I put down too much. What I'd wanted to do was do a really thin line of white, but I'm going to have to re-ink that area. That is the downside of using a brush pen for corrections, is that sometimes it leaks water. You guys heard me complain about that almost all video anyway, so, you know, I should have known better. There's actually not too many areas I really feel like need a lot of correction. And then what I want to use this for is I'm just going to add little flicks of white by dipping my brush pen into my Bleed Proof White. All right, So, do we need to ink this? What do you guys think? You guys think we need to ink this? Well, if you're on the fence about whether or not you even want to ink something like this, what you can do is you can just leave it alone for a couple days. You can step away for a while, think about it. You don't have to make any decisions right away. When it comes to art, you can take your time, unless you're in a rush, and then you might make bad choices, and you might just have to live with them. And that's a learning experience too. So the more risks you take, the more you learn, but the more you take time and think about things and kind of analyze them, the better choices you can make. So before I decide anything though, I need to allow the white we've put down to have a chance to dry. So I've given it some thought. I'm not going to ink this traditionally, but what I am going to do is just here and there, I'm going to maybe tighten up the line art a little bit with a darker color. So on this hat, for example, I'm using a darker brown just to help create some shadows and to kind of help delineate things from the background. This is a really easy technique to do, and it doesn't even require any additional materials. It just requires you going through and selecting darker colors and kind of inking over it, or using the same color, like for the skin, but instead of watering it down this time. In fact, I'll zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Oh, it's the wrong color. Rawr. It looks like a skin tone, but it's yellow. We'll just go over it with the correct skin tone this time. That really bothers me. Oh, how would I fix this? Probably by doing something I'm gonna regret. Okay. Water brush. Oh, it's got a lot of white in it. Let's get that out. Scrub it on a paper towel. Oh, and now it's empty. The end. Okay, we'll go with our second choice of water brush. This one doesn't have any white in it, and we're gonna need some paper towel that at least has a clean section. So we're working with dye-based inks. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go over that section and we're gonna pick it up. And then we're gonna go over that section again. I hate doing this, but I feel like it's necessary. And pick it up. All right, that at least lightened the yellow. So when we go over it again, it won't be so prominent. Now let that dry. Now over here, if you want to, you can take a little bit of light pink and just kind of go over areas that maybe touch the skin. And you don't have to do this step at all. You can skip this step if you are satisfied with the piece. I'm just going to tighten a couple of things on her. Now I want kind of an orange, if I have a good one. Let's see. Okay, that should be all right. Okay, then we're going to take, where is it? The next lightest orange. I think this is it. And we're just going to kind of blend that out a little bit so it's not such a harsh edge. And then we're going to blend it out with yellow. So our intention isn't really to darken the hair color too much. It's just to add a little more definition because it was a lot of yellow and not a lot of contrast. I think now we need the blue. All right, yeah. What do y'all think? Looking better? And take just a little bit of the brown over here on the far end of the basket, and then all right, I think how many times can I say all right? I think we are just about done with this piece. So I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I also want to thank Artix for sending me these watercolor brush pens a while back. I've done several tutorials using these watercolor brush pens. I find them quite comparable to any other similar bodied watercolor brush pens on the market. And if you're looking for some really inexpensive brush watercolor markers, these are a great place to start. And I'll pop a link in the description below so you guys can get your own. You'll also find a list of the materials used in this tutorial in the description as well. I always say this and then I'm like, oh, let me do one more thing. Just want to break up that orange in her hair. That might ruin it, but that might also help it. I want to break up the orange a little bit because it's just a little too tight, and I'll break up the brown a little bit. But I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope this was useful, helpful, and inspiring for you guys. I hope this will inspire you to try a similar technique to get a little bit looser with your work. And as always, I really hope this will inspire you guys to try a little drawing of your own. I really feel like something hand-drawn, something drawn by you really means so much. So if you're the type of person who enjoys giving cards because you're part of the process of making them, if you enjoy making cards because it is an artistic outlet for you, I would really love to see you guys do more drawing. And I am happy to help you draw anything you want to learn how to draw. So if there's something you've been curious about learning how to draw and I don't have it on my channel already, please let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to see how to paint it, or if you want to see how to mark it, or if you want to see how to ink it, let me know. No, cannot talk tonight. Brain is moving faster than my mouth. Let me know that as well. I love getting feedback from you guys, and I love making things that help you. So hopefully I'll see you guys again really soon, and I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Bye, guys.